Today we're very lucky to be joined in studio by three of our friends from Cornell's Lab of Ornithology, the brains and hard work behind the wildly popular bird identification app, Merlin. You just saw the intro video. As many of you know, Merlin has been the go-to app for bird and birdsong identification for several years now. And those of us who love Merlin know how powerful and exciting it can be to use. That's why there are hundreds of thousands of users and millions of birds being ID'd every single day. Welcome, audience. We've got a lot to cover this hour. We'll dive deep into the app itself. We'll be unlocking its more robust features, and we'll learn how we all play a part in advancing conservation and conversation worldwide. For our viewers, I want you to join me in welcoming our friends from the Lab of O. We have Jesse Barry and Drew Weber here, in addition to Grant Van Horn, who's joining us from Boulder, Colorado today. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming into the studio today.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Good to see you, Grant. A few notes for the viewers. This event is being recorded. Yes, we are live right now. And it'll be viewable at this very same URL afterwards. So if you want to share this with friends or colleagues or check out the recording, you can do so shortly after we are through today. We're going to be asking you, our viewers, a few questions in a second. So get your smartphones ready, hopefully they're handy, for some interactive polling. And we'll also be taking your questions via the QR code that will display here in a moment. Quick instruction, you're going to be sent to a Slido interface. There you'll submit your responses to the polling questions that are going to come up, and you'll also see a Q&A tab at the top there. So you can submit your questions there. We'll take them throughout the conversation and keep things rolling that way. We'll take them in the order that they come in as best we can. So again, we're going to show this QR code here. We'll be sharing also, in addition, a few things to think about here. We're going to be sharing a lot of URLs and resources in the chat, which you should see on the right side of your video stream player. You'll see the chat over there. If it hasn't opened up, click the dialog box up at the top of your screen. So heads up for all those URLs and resources. They're going to be coming fast and furious throughout. So just open them up in your browser. And if you happen to be watching the archived recording, that is after today, those links will be available in the overview section, which is just below. There'll be a series of URLs there that you can access any of the resources that we're talking about in the conversation we had, that we have today. So now, as promised, a few questions for you, our viewers. I want to ask you question number one, which is, where are you joining us from today? We know that invariably our bird enthusiast audience come from all over the globe, so I think it'd be nice to take a quick temp check and find out where people are joining us from. As we know, and Merlin users, you know this, right? Merlin can identify the sounds of 560 bird species that occur in the US and Canada, continental, and 250 plus bird species that occur in Europe and elsewhere. So to the panel, what's been your experience here? I mean, we have a worldwide user base. Let's see what happens here. Looks like we do, whoa, overwhelmingly, a lot of Ithacans joining us today. Jersey's representing.
Good state for birding.
Yeah, we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Good. British Columbia. Great. So, as suspected, primarily a continental audience with some sprinkling of international friends that are joining us today. And we're going to get into the degree to which our international audience and app users are actually using the app and what the future is for, working the whole globe with Merlin. So good. Thank you for participating in that one. Good to get a sense of where people are from. Question number two, what kind of birder are you? So this is a scale. I think you all know what I'm talking about here. So this runs from the mildly curious, we're going to start with, I take little or no notice of birds, up to the mildly curious, all the way to the high end of the scale. I am an obsessed enthusiast, and I imagine that we will have several of you, certainly our audience today. Number one, we see that there are increasingly interested amateurs who are eager to learn. There we go. So that's part of our mission statement. That's what we're really trying to do here, is to get people who are more interested in birding, more interested in conservation, and ultimately adapters of the Merlin app. Are you a Merlin app user? Let's find out who is in our audience and how many converts we have yet to convert. So yes, I'm a Merlin app user. No, not yet. Or what is an app? I pray for you. Let's see how we do here. Wow. Okay, so we're at 75% Merlin app users. So that's something to think about as we tune our conversation today. Most of our audience is familiar with something like 25% who are no, not yet. So that's encouraging. Great. Okay, Jesse Barry, let's kick off the conversation with you. We've seen the intro video. We have 75% of our audience knows the app. Tell us a little bit, what else do we need to know more about the app? Its origin story, how long you've been working on it and so on.
Yeah, so we started working on Merlin about 10 years ago. And we just wanted to help anybody who's curious enough answer that basic question, what's that bird I'm seeing?
Yeah.
So if you notice something nearby and you're figuring, okay, what is this? Because humans have this like innate sense of wanting to put names on things. And once you can like figure out what's the name of that bird, it unlocks like all this information. And so if you think back to, 10 years ago, there would have just been Google as a major search engine, and we got a visual here for this one.
Okay.
And so you can imagine going to Google and you start typing things into the search box, and just something like orange bird or blue bird, it's really hard for anything meaningful to come up. And so Merlin thought, well, maybe we can just ask some pretty simple questions. And we got rolling with that because the only other option was a field guide, a classic book.
Yes.
And while there's fantastic field guides for North America, not everybody has them. Other parts of the world, there's just not many field guides at all. And so we just wanted to create a resource that could give you the name of the bird and then unlock all this information. Because once you know that, hey, I'm looking at a blue jay, it nests in trees, it starts to, give you that little bit more curiosity of like, well, how do these blue jays survive? And when you build that connection to those birds, that's when, that conservation spirit might start to be cultivated in folks watching birds.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? Just a little interlude. I've always appreciated the phonetic spelling out of bird calls. I found this tremendously helpful, and maybe that's where people landed ultimately.
Yeah.
There's this, this something that looks like a blue jay in the tree, and it's making this sound. That's usually how
Right.
we used to arrive at that, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
now, with Merlin as a digital resource,
Yeah.
you can play the call of that blue jay or killdeer or those other species or phoebe, right there at your fingertips. And so that was a pretty big step because, at the time, like iPhones were just starting to get into the market and beginning to be picked up with more wider use.
So you work at the Macaulay Library. You've been there 10 years. For some of our viewers, they might not be familiar with the library itself, how it fits into the larger Lab of Ornithology ecosystem, and that's kind of one of the power, the central components, the fundamental component of how these apps work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Macaulay Library started back in 1929 when the very first bird sounds were recorded right here in Ithaca. And then it's grown over the years, and now it's a resource that we've brought online, brought into apps, and also the wonderful thing is like anybody can contribute their sightings and their sounds. So we've been gathering sounds from the community for decades, and now more recently even more through a collaboration with Ebird. And so the Macaulay Library is kind of part of what's powering Merlin, in addition to the Ebird project. And so Ebird is a global database of bird observations. And we've got a slide here that will show you all the spots in the world where Ebird sightings have been entered. And it kind of looks like a light of, cities or something like that, where you can see there's a lot of activity for birding where people are. That makes sense. And then we've got these really interesting data gaps in there, those dark areas where we're just so curious to learn what species are there. And so that's, part of our continual challenge is to understand bird populations at broad scales. Ebird is a project that's breaking ground in doing that. And when we pair those, raw sightings from observers with statistical analysis, we can make really compelling visuals and start to understand bird populations visually. And so there's a slide of this Canada warbler. And this is just one of my favorite maps. I really wanted to share it with you because when Canada warblers are moving from, their wintering grounds in South America up to their breeding grounds in North America, and I think this is an animation, if we can just hit that play button there.
Oh, I don't know if we have that.
All
Sorry.
right, so if right now we're looking at the map of Canada warbler in South America, and for many years we didn't really know where they were wintering, but now with so many birders out there putting in their sightings, we can see where Canada warbler is for the winter, and then we can also figure out where they're going to the breeding grounds. And then the next thing is going to be to learn how are their populations doing. Are they increasing or decreasing? And so the next wave of research is going to be looking at the trends into bird populations. So when it comes back to Merlin, we want to make sure that it's easier for people to know what species are likely at that place where they're birding. So that's kind of where Ebird is able to make it so that anyone using Merlin knows these are the birds at my date and location. And that's where bird ID gets much simpler. but Ebird has so much more to offer. Just wanted to get that little, little window into what we're doing with the project.
Perfect. Pivoting to Drew Weber. So how do you fit into this? How does your work kind of overlap or complement some of the work that Jesse does?
Yeah, so Jesse was mentioning the Macaulay Library. It's this huge archive, a digital archive of natural sounds, photos, and videos. And the cool thing is, Merlin needs tons of data to really function as it should, to be able to identify birds. And we have that at the Macaulay Library, and it's all contributed by, birders and naturalists and, citizen scientists around the world. It's a really cool resource. And so what we're able to do with Merlin is we can actually, for each species, we can select, the best representative photo of a male, of a female, of what a young bird looks like, and we can, feature that in the app. And we can do the same thing for sounds, a song, a call. And then, for the really powerful piece of the app is that we have these millions of photos, millions of sounds that we can use to train the machine learning tools in the app.
Perfect. Now, as mentioned, you started thinking about this 10 years ago, putting together the concept, and Merlin was launched actually 8 years ago. It feels like that time really flew. Maybe probably for you, or maybe it's dragged, but it has come a long way, right? So when you first started, if we think about it, 8 years ago, right? Apps looked a lot different. So how was the reception? How did it launch? How was the functionality? What state was it at? You have obviously this benefit of 2020 hindsight. Where did you see it when it was launched? What kind of reception was there when it was launched?
Yeah, so it was launched in 2014.
Okay.
It was a very simple app at that point.
Yeah.
285 species, and it was very basic. You could answer 3 questions and then get a list of results of birds to explore, and have photos and sounds.
What were the questions? Size of the bird and so on?
Size of the bird, what color they are, some basic behavior, and then it's super basic, right? It didn't even cover all of the birds that somebody might actually have in their backyard across the U.S. and Canada, and so we've worked to expand that over the years. It was very good reception kind of right out of the gate. I think we hit our first 1 million users, about 2 years in. And so that was like an exciting milestone. From there we kind of just continued expanding out to additional parts of the world. And I think we have a slide to show.
Sure, let's check this out. So here we go. Let's check out this slide here. I'll save my question for after this. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so this is just a good representation of us expanding to new parts of the world. This is content for India.
Got it.
And so, at this point, I think there's another slide. We've basically expanded to 8,500 species, covering birds on every continent.
Yep.
And the thing that we'll be working on this summer is kind of finishing off the rest of the species we really have. Is basically Southeast Asia that we're still working on.
15 language support.
15 languages.
That's huge.
Yeah, so full Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Mandarin. We recently added Korean and Indonesian. It's really fun to work with partners kind of around the world to make Merlin helpful for their communities. That's one thing we're really excited about being able to do.
And the stat that jumps out at me, you've got 1 million users a month.
Yeah.
How does that kind of stack up against other apps that either function similarly or not?
It's pretty cool because like that 1 million a month is like what took us 2.5 years initially to reach. So we're seeing this huge usage of Merlin, enough that in the App Store we're actually generally in the top 10 reference apps, which is pretty cool to have a bird app up there with like Google Translate.
That's amazing. Congratulations on your success, and I hope it continues for sure. Grant Van Horn, let's kick it over to Boulder, Colorado. Tell us a little bit about the tech behind this. You have a key role in this whole thing. Tell us about your work, how you got involved in it, and then I'll let you take it away and tell us how it all kind of works and hangs together.
Cool, yeah. I mean, so I think Jesse and I started working together all the way back in 2011, sort of on the initial brainstorming of Merlin. And just been involved ever since. So finished, did a lot of the photo ID work in the app as part of my master's. and yeah, and part of my PhD continued refining that and expanding it to those 8,000 species that Drew was referring to. Yeah, and then after the PhD came to the lab myself, and we started toying around with the idea of doing sound ID, and we really sunk our teeth into it during the summer of 2020, and yeah, and then launched it in June of 2021, and now most recently we've released Sound ID 2.0 for 2022. So it's kind of funny, yeah. I mean, a lot of research has gone into sound identification for bird purposes over the years. A lot of it happening at the Lab of O. And I was just lucky enough to kind of come at the right moment where we had kind of all the data we needed. We had the right people. We could build the right teams to make it a reality and make it a success. So yeah, so far it's been great, and really looking forward to the future. But yeah, I can briefly describe kind of how this thing works. If I can get my slide deck shown. So, I'm going to use an analogy of comparing Merlin Sound ID to a student, and this analogy, completely falls apart as soon as you go into the details. But since we've all been students ourselves, it's a nice reference to use. And if you think back, you might remember learning addition, and your teacher didn't stick with just simply 1 + 1 to teach you addition. They swapped in a whole bunch of different numbers, and this was to, the concept of addition stays the same. It's always kind of X + Y, but the teachers know that diversity is important, and they showed you a whole bunch of numbers. So this allowed you to kind of learn addition in a wide variety of situations. Now, it's kind of stick with me, but we do this exact same tactic with Merlin Sound ID, right? So this screen is showing you 8 examples of northern cardinal. Now, these are spectrogram images. These are visual representations of sound, and I'll get into these in a few more slides. But the gist is the same as you as a student learning addition for Merlin. So we show Merlin a whole bunch of examples of northern cardinal. This is just 8 examples in our big training data set. We actually have over 5,000 examples like this for northern cardinal, right? And so the purpose is to show Merlin, what does a northern cardinal sound like in Ithaca, New York, or in Houston, Texas? And what does it sound like when a car is driving by, or the leaves are rustling, or you're taking your phone out of your pocket? So we just want all of this diversity. And so again, similar to the way that you learned addition with a whole bunch of examples, we're teaching Merlin bird songs with just a ton of expert curated examples. So, kind of moving a little bit deeper into the nuts and bolts of the app. Imagine we have this chipping sparrow vocalizing, which we'll visualize as this waveform image. When you press record on your phone on the app, what happens is we turn on the microphone and we start recording the sound as it arrives. And on a computer or your phone, sound is represented as just a long series of seemingly random numbers, and they do kind of look weird. It's 0.0002 and in this case, there's actually, for this one little visualization here, there's 66,000 of these numbers. Now, what we need Merlin to do is take those numbers and output a list of species that it, quote unquote, hears. And then we'll use that to update the display and let you know that in this case, a chipping sparrow is vocalizing. And to also, we don't want to show that there's a Swainson's hawk because there is no Swainson's hawk, et cetera. So, okay, so how do we actually do this? We need to go from this kind of random list of numbers into these results that we can use to update the interface. Well, for that's where these spectrograms come back into play. So we're going to take this, this audio signal, which again is just a list of numbers, and we're going to convert it into a spectrogram. And so this is a special image. It has frequency in the Y direction, and it has time in the X direction. And there's nothing, our project was certainly not the first project to be using spectrograms. Spectrograms are used all over the place. They were used for bird recognition prior to Sound ID. They're just kind of like a general tool that projects that are analyzing sound will use. So this is kind of step one, is convert this thing into a spectrogram. Okay, so why is this helpful? Well, over the last decade, certainly, really starting in 2012, the computer vision field, which is a subset of the AI field, has really matured. So we can now find all your cat and dog photos. Apple and Google do amazing jobs, and Facebook do amazing jobs at detecting faces and photos. So all of those kind of visual, photo processing type stuff falls into this branch of AI called computer vision. And that field has really matured over the last decade. And so, some of my initial experiments was showing that, we could just run computer vision techniques on those spectrograms. And so I'm just going to kind of, wave my hands and represent computer vision as this black box with AI on it. And so what we have is, the way Sound ID works is we have a computer vision system that literally looks at sound, right? So that we kind of migrate from hearing sound to looking at sound. And its job is to output a list of species that it thinks it sees in these spectrograms. And as soon as it sees something, that's when we'll go ahead and update the display. Now, what happens if we have a whole bunch of bird species vocalizing? It all stays the same. So, here we have these three species. You have eastern bluebird, a barn swallow, and we have our chipping sparrow again. They're all vocalizing, and this is the sound as it is when it hits your phone. We're going to take that sound and do the exact same pipeline. We're going to convert it to a spectrogram where we get visual representations of the sound. We're going to pass it through our computer vision system, and that computer vision system is responsible for outputting barn swallow, eastern bluebird, and chipping sparrow. And that's kind of it. At a high level, that is the magic of Sound ID, and a lot of it really boils down to, again, kind of going back to the student analogy, is building that nice big curriculum of examples. And that's where we spend. Drew and I spend a ton of our time brainstorming ways of how can we improve our data set, improve the diversity. So again, that we cover all these kind of niche use cases of a car driving by or a plane's flying over, and you still want to be able to identify the birds. That's it.
Beautiful. Did we have that the global animation? Are we gonna fold that part into your into the presentation, or no? Sorry, I thought we were looking at an app. Yeah.
I figured a question will come up about it, so I was gonna save it for when a question comes up.
Okay, my bad. I just want to make sure we weren't omitting any part of your presentation. Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Drew. So great time to transition to some audience questions, which are coming in quite nicely. This is one that I had a question. This is a question from viewer Ryan, who asked, how does the app filter background noise? I live by a main road, and even with all the noise, the app still works. I often marvel at this too. I pull it out, I hit go, and boom, it starts populating with 5 birds, and there's so much other stuff going on. People mowing lawns and elsewhere. Do you kind of roll off some of those lower frequencies? How do you optimize it to capture the sound of birds?
It's a great question for Grant.
Oh,
yeah.
There we go, Grant.
Yes. So we embrace that background noise. So in addition to millions of examples for just bird vocalizations, we've also accrued a massive data set of non-bird vocalizations. And it was just like the things you listed off. So it's lawn mowers, it's planes, it's cars driving by, it's your jacket rustling in the wind. And we use that, we use it in a process called augmentation. So we'll take a nice clean clip of a northern cardinal, and because sound is additive, we can just add a lawnmower sound on top of it. Now we've got a new training example that we can use to teach Merlin, hey, this is still northern cardinal, it just so happens that there's a lawnmower in the background. And this is actually kind of one of the fun challenges that we have with this expanding around the world is, the background sounds that you're going to get in India might not be very similar to the background sounds you get in the United States. And so not only are we looking to build our data set of just bird vocalizations, but also to expand, just our knowledge of what the world sounds like, and make sure the models are robust to it.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. I have another question, and this is one that I have and several others have had. We've been planning on asking this one, but it comes in a great form from a question from an anonymous viewer. Can some birds, like a mockingbird, I think catbirds may have this capacity, I'm not sure, imitate other birds well enough to fool Merlin? How does that work out? Mockingbirds, big problem?
Oh yeah, definitely. They can do a great job. I mean, if they can trick a human, there's a good chance that they can trick the model at this point, right?
Yeah.
I forget if Grant specifically mentioned this, but we're looking at like 3-second snippets of audio when we're identifying birds.
Yeah.
And so from that short amount of time, like if you're listening to a northern mockingbird for like 10 seconds, 30 seconds, there's like some distinctive sounds that you can usually pick out. In a 3-second clip, it can be tricky. And so as we look to expand what we're doing with Sound ID, we'll probably be looking at like a longer time period just to better capture some of those tricky birds like that. That being said, it does actually do a remarkable job for some of those mimics, even if in its current state. But it can be fun to see, what birds can the mockingbird imitate well enough to like start listing in Merlin.
Yeah,
it's
it has
almost
a
like
roster of 30-something calls or something like that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Has a human ever tricked Merlin into a fake ID? I've tried.
Definitely in the early days, but I think that's one of the differences between this. Like last year, we did a lot of improvements to the back-end system, and so it's much harder to fool Merlin today than it was a couple years ago.
Good.
Yeah, like a year ago, you could like make a reasonable imitation of a bird, and it would pop up that bird, which was kind of a fun game to play.
Yeah.
And now it's pretty good at just ignoring you.
Great. That's great to hear. Good little transitional moment here. Our friend Kathy Borgman from the lab has put together a cool app video demo that we're going to roll here. And this is for the 75% of users who are already Merlin users. Maybe you learned about some new features, and those who have yet to use Merlin. And hopefully we'll download it during this presentation here. Learn about some of the most essential features. So let's roll this app video demo. Thanks, Kathy, for this.
Merlin is your bird ID wizard. Get help identifying the birds you see and hear. To identify who's singing, tap Sound ID. Next, tap Record. And listen in with Merlin. Merlin gives you a list of who's singing in real time. When you finish recording your mystery bird, tap Stop. Now it's time to compare what you recorded with Merlin's best matches. Let's listen to Merlin's first choice, a swamp sparrow. Now let's compare this recording to the one you made. This sounds exactly like what you recorded. When you are confident, scroll down and tap This is my bird. Celebrate your newfound bird and save it to your life list by answering a few more questions about your observation. Now that you're on a roll, find more birds near you with the Explore feature. The best way to find more birds is to explore a list of species you are most likely to see where you are. Tap the Filter button, choose Filter by Likely Birds, and Sort by Most Likely to see a list of birds you're likely to see where you are. See more about a species by tapping on the bird. You can browse photos, hear sounds, and see range maps. Merlin has many ways to help you name that bird, including Photo ID. Merlin uses the same machine learning tools it uses to identify sounds to identify species in a photo. I saw a bird the other day that I couldn't identify. Let's get Merlin's help. Here's a photo of my mystery bird. Zoom until the bird fills the box, and then tap Next. Now we'll answer as many questions as we can about the photo. Tap Identify to see a list of possibilities. Merlin's first choice looks like a great fit, but let's look at a few more just to be sure. No, the yellow-rumped warbler is a perfect fit. Merlin is your personalized field guide, helping you put names to the birds you see and hear anywhere in the world.
And that was the world debut of the demo video for the app. Thank you, Kathy, for that again. Drew, I want to kick it over to you. So let's talk about the community engagement component. You know, the fundamental functionality of this whole thing is user participation. People are using the apps. How do you want people to share the recordings? How do you want people to interact with the app?
Yeah, so one fun thing that people are already doing is that you can actually, you know, after you make a recording and you see the birds that we're singing, you can actually share that with your friends. There's a share option right in the app. Huh. You can like text it to them or email it to them, and they can actually open it up in their Merlin app and see the same birds that were identified. So they can kind of be right there for that experience, which is a pretty cool thing. When you get those identifications, you can also add them to your life list. So there's an option right in Merlin to say this is my bird, and it allows you, with a free account, you can basically add it to the list of birds that you've seen in your life, and see that list kind of grow over time. It's a fun way of keeping track of places you've been, birds you've seen, experiences you've had, and a good reminder for those things. And then if you're getting really comfortable with all the birds that you're able to identify, you're ready to take the next step, you can actually create a full checklist in Ebird, like Jesse was talking about, and you can actually upload these recordings to your checklist, which will archive them in the Macaulay Library, and then they'll be available to help improve sound ID in the future.
And also, submitting recordings contributes to that larger data set that Grant was talking about before. We were talking about the northern cardinal, how many hundreds or thousands, instances he has of that. That's really helping things even improve on a daily basis, yes?
Exactly, yeah, because birds have very variable songs. Mockingbird, very variable.
Sure.
Some less variable, but yeah, having more and more examples of what it sounds like, especially in different environments. With different birds singing over them, or different non-bird things, as we were talking about. That all helps really improve how Sound ID can work in all different scenarios.
Perfect. Jesse Barry, Global Big Day was just this Saturday, May 14th. Many of our viewers, we're certain, know all about it. Tell us what happened this Saturday.
Yeah, so big days are this tradition in birding where you take a 24-hour window and try to find as many species of birds as possible. So it's one of those fun, lightly competitive events in birding. And this Saturday we had more than 50,000 people all around the world participating in Global Big Day. And there were folks from over 200 countries who were out birding together, submitting their sightings into Ebird. And so we were just getting the snapshot of birds and their distribution all across the world from this single day event. And it's just very fun, and also collecting valuable data for science and conservation.
Perfect. And we're going to share a URL for just to kind of view how things shook out last Saturday, and also for just the the larger picture of the project and how you can get involved. Certainly for next big day, but in between now and then, plenty of ways to get involved in some of the resources we're sharing here. We had a question from viewer Joseph, and I'm going to kick it back to you, Jesse, in just a moment. Joseph asks, and this is probably often an FAQ, is it possible to use an auxiliary mic with the Merlin bird ID? If not, why and will this functionality be possible in the future? So let me just back up here. It turns out there's a course in Bird Academy called How to Record Bird Sounds, right?
Yeah.
So for those that want to step up their game and get the recordings a little more dialed and a little more resolute and all of that stuff, what advice do you have for people, the course and otherwise?
Yeah, plugging in an external microphone is a great idea.
Yeah.
There's some nice models of shotgun microphones available that will really amplify that sound. The little mics that are just tiny ones, that might not do too much because they don't have too much reach. But the course in Bird Academy is going to tell you all about the different options of microphones, how it works, get into all the details, and it is really a nice way to get started recording bird sounds, and Merlin's performance will get even a little better because you've got that additional reach from the microphone.
Perfect. So plenty of how-tos and recommendations on how to record your bird sounds. So we'll share that URL if we haven't already. Scope that out. There's plenty of information there. Grant, one of the key components of this is geolocation, right? It helps kind of narrow the potential birds that are in your area when you're recording and doing the listening. How about for those of us who travel and want to, take this experience elsewhere? What happens with the app? How do we use it? Tell us how that works.
Yeah, so everything on Merlin right now is offline. Yeah, so as soon as you have a bird pack downloaded, you don't need internet connectivity to use, for example, Sound ID. And the new kind of cool thing we've done with this 2.0 release of Sound ID is we've baked in a brand new, machine learning model that's specific to geolocation. So a lot of like people have mentioned prior on this call, if we've got location and time of year, we can use that to really restrict the set of species that are under consideration for photo ID or for sound ID. And that prior to 2.0, we were limited in having to have a network connection in order to get that subset of species. For sound ID in the 2.0 version of the app, we now have an ability to just get your lat long from the phone, which is on its own GPS chip typically, so we don't need cellular connection. And we can query a model on your device to ask that model, like, hey, I'm in Ithaca, New York. I don't have any cell service. What birds should be under consideration? And that model will give us a subset of species. And what that does for the user experience is it prevents us from showing, species that if you are in Ithaca, it prevents us from showing stuff that would be in Europe or Australia or India, well outside the normal range of that bird. So it really just kind of cleans up and focuses the results to those things that are relevant. But yeah, so just in terms of traveling, the tip is to, preferably before you go and you have Wi-Fi connectivity, grab that bird pack. So like Drew was mentioning at the beginning, Merlin covers 8,500 species, with beautiful photos and text descriptions and maps. Grab one of those things before you hop on the plane or in the car. And with that, you can always use the Explore Birds view of the app to just see kind of like what is around you. And then for Sound ID, if you're in a supported region, everything should just work nicely, regardless of whether you have cell or Wi-Fi service.
Perfect, great. And I imagine we'll further augment that great advice you just gave us with some links and so on in the chat, right? So how to travel with your Merlin Bird ID. Jesse, pivoting a little bit, I want to pull back, 30,000 foot view here. How does Merlin fit in with the larger mission of the Lab of Ornithology, right? Dedication to conservation and so on. How does it contribute to the mission? This is a big question, but I think you're prepared.
Yeah. Well, I think at a fundamental level, we just want more people to be excited about birds, to notice birds, and to build that connection with nature. So as more people are interested in birds, they also are learning more and starting to make decisions a little differently. So maybe you're thinking about, that habitat in your backyard and, putting up nest boxes and which trees do the birds like. You might be thinking about contributing, land or effort into a local land trust. So there's that thinking about what is the habitat that birds need that can be, inspired by just that chance to see birds and identify them. And then as interest in birds increases, there's some people who are contributing very meaningful data on the sightings that they're noticing, and that's where we can start to understand bird populations at the global scale. And we're combining the data that we get from humans, but other types of sensors as well, such as radar data. So you can actually see bird migration on radar imagery. The Weather Channel filters it out, but right next to a thunderstorm, there's going to be flocks of birds moving. And now we can count those, like the number of birds passing through. The BirdCast project is now able to quantify how many birds are moving through the US and Canada on a given day. And what we've found is that over time, bird populations are just crashing. We're losing them at staggering rates since the 1970s. And this, I think, is starting to inspire a lot of people to figure out, okay, what can we do about that? And when we're collectively, as a birding community, gathering those observations, going to places that are underbirded and putting them into Ebird, that's a really strong step to understand what's happening with bird populations. And then researchers can pick up those fine-grained questions of, okay, why are bird populations declining? What's causing this? And what changes might we as a society need to make to support birds? So, we're hopeful that this, connection between lots of people out looking at birds and working with conservation practitioners in time we'll be able to reverse this decline of bird populations and have humans and birds living side by side in intact natural ecosystems. So,
hey, I want to talk about population decline. There was a seismic article that was published, I think it was last year or the year before, forgive me, and I hadn't really prepared for this, but I was just thinking about it, and we should have maybe discussed it a little bit before, but can you kind of summarize that article? That was a revelation for a lot of people, no surprise to many, but it presented this bird population decline as a genuine crisis, that it was kind of indicative of larger problems related to climate change and our very survival on the planet. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. That was a really monumental paper, because we've seen similar ones with insects that are just showing that they're declining. This one for birds was able to show that picture of how their populations have been just decimated in these last 50 years. And I think the techniques that they used in there with the radar imagery and counting was a very cool step. And I think that the nice thing about that paper is it made it to mainstream media, and so it seems like the world is starting to hear this message that we're losing birds, we're losing insects, and we're hopeful that as that word gets out and there's more people paying attention, changing their behavior on the day-to-day, that we'll be able to see some improvements over time.
Drew Weber, I want to kick it back over to you as the project overseer, coordinator, and so on. What do you know about app users? Have there been things revealed to you specifically with the with the newest iteration of Sound ID and so on? What are you learning about people and their use of the app?
Yeah, so this is the first spring where Sound ID has been fully available.
Yeah.
And there have been some interesting things that we've noticed. In the past, we'd see, the peak of app activity was in the mornings. People would go out and want to do some birding and try to figure out what they're seeing. What we're seeing now is, there's still a big peak in the morning, which is when birds are most active and singing. But we're also seeing another big peak after, people are out of work or out of classes in the afternoon and evening. So that, people are hearing stuff, they're interested in it, and they're pulling out the app again just to hear what's going on. We're also seeing that, typically the weekends are the biggest days for us as far as number of users. Last weekend about 420 people logged onto Merlin just to figure out what they were hearing. But the weekdays are actually still really active times as well. So people are hearing things and getting curious and pulling out Merlin all the time, which is really neat to see.
That's excellent. Funny data point here, not funny. Remarkable. You have 63 collective years of total app usage so far this month.
Yeah.
And we're just about halfway through. So I don't know how that fits into the Macaulay Library scheme, but that's significant.
Yeah.
It's a huge number.
It's a huge number. Yeah.
Is it? I have a couple of viewer questions here that I'd like to take, and I think I'll just throw these up as jump balls. Grant, you tell us if you're better suited to answer these than maybe anybody else here. A question from a viewer. We may have answered it, but I think it's worth going back to because I'm kind of nerding out over this stuff myself. Question from a viewer. Do bird sounds have signatures in the frequency domain that are unique, much like fingerprints to humans? Again, this goes back to the relatively narrow frequency domain that we use to capture bird sounds, but at the same time, you're interested in all that other stuff. What can you tell us about that? Did that present any challenges? Are there opportunities in the relative, proximity of frequencies with birds? Grant, I think I'll kick that over to you. You get what I'm going for here?
Yeah. So in terms of just species identification, yes, certainly. There's a unique, each species kind of gives us this unique pattern in that frequency domain that we can latch on to for recognition. What we haven't explored yet is, sort of like the fingerprint for humans, is whether individual birds, within the same species also have that unique pattern. Is there a unique, vocalization for that one chickadee in your yard that we can detect over and over again? And that's, that to me is like a pretty exciting future use case of Sound ID but we haven't explored it just yet.
The other day I was experimenting with the app, and there was a nuthatch fighting with two blue jays and a robin in the mix. And I was using the app just at first to identify the nuthatch. I suspected it was. And then I was playing it back, and I was wondering if I was exacerbating the problem. And viewer Sharon asks, is it a hazard for the birds for users to play the songs repeatedly, confusing or making them want to fight or seek a mate? I don't know. Is this a thing?
Yeah. Birds they're very responsive, right?
Yeah.
Which is very fun for seeing the bird for the first time. But yeah, you don't want to like just have that song repeating on loop, because birds they're focused right now. They're trying to find that mate that you're going to be feeding young, and so when they're responding to you, that's just sucking up the energy, and they might not have a lot of energy to spare, as they've got a lot going on in their lives too. So we just want to be respectful of the birds and not overplay those sounds to them.
Perfect. I want to kick it back to the audience here. We have plenty of time here, at least another 10 minutes or so. So I do welcome your questions throughout. Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left or so. This seems like an FAQ from Phyllis, so I think I'll let that be addressed by the chat team here. I am going to ask this rare bird question because this whole thing kind of hinges on large data sets and so on. Has there been any discoveries of what were previously thought rare birds? Has it happened in the Merlin domain? Have you been lucky enough to encounter anything like this?
Yeah, I've got one fun story from a friend. And they were down in California, outside of Ventura, setting up a kestrel box, and they're listening to the kestrels, and then Merlin popped up with a zone-tailed hawk, which is a really rare bird in California. They're kind of in Arizona, but they don't make it over there. And she looked up, and there was a zone-tailed hawk up above. So that was a species that doesn't regularly occur in the state, and Merlin picked it up.
I want to ask you, for those of us, many people, I imagine you have people that travel to the Lab of O, but this is just a sort of a genuine enthusiast kind of question. But tell us what the experience is like going to the Lab of O. I find it to be an absolutely fascinating place. I was lucky enough to get a backstage tour kind of thing, or a behind the scenes tour, got to see the library and so on. Do lay people off the street have access to some of the resources? Can you get a private tour? Can you see the archive itself?
Yeah, so the visitor center has a lot of programming going on, which you can tap into. And then I think there is something magical about walking in that building, because it has this combination of art and science. And so there's beautiful murals on the wall, one depicting all the bird families of the families of birds in the world, and plenty of visitor center things that are in the works. So it's definitely worth a visit, and we always love to see people showing up.
Perfect. I love going. Question from a viewer, and this is one that I had also. What's in store for the future versions of Merlin? What is the most urgent on your programming to-do list, Grant or Drew or anybody? I mean, what's next, right? You've achieved a state of widespread adoption, usage of the app all over the world. Congratulations on that. There must be some problems. There must be something you want to fix. Any future ambitions? Anything driving your work? I know that you just kind of want to chill out and take a breath, but
we're ready.
You're ready? What's next?
I think
what are you looking at?
One big obvious thing that we are tackling right now is expanding Sound ID to more species. So, there's a huge amount of diversity in the neotropics. We want to expand, down into Central and South America. We're also working with, partners in India. There's, a lot of species there. And just, kind of move across the globe as we're able to. We're still collecting a lot of, recordings so that we're able to do that. We need about 100 recordings per species to be able to add it to Sound ID. And so we're still working in a lot of parts of the world to get to that level. But yeah, that's going to be one obvious thing that we're working on. And I know Grant and Jesse both have other ideas that they're excited about.
Jesse.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're also looking forward to Merlin being a little bit more social. Just that, ability to connect with some friends, see what others are seeing. That's a missing piece that someday we'd like to have in there.
Integration with other apps.
Yeah, and just like birding is so much about the community and kind of like discovering, what did my friend over here see, or like figuring out where to go. And so we just want to make it easier for people to connect and find new places to explore.
Grant Van Horn, what's on your docket? What's troubling you these days that you want to fix?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Mockingbird is well up there on my list.
That's amazing.
No, yeah, I mean, I think, this is just the tip of the iceberg, I feel like, for Sound ID. I mean, I think we've got a lot of opportunity for, like Drew was mentioning, just, larger breadth in terms of the species we cover. The model itself can, we're just in the early days of kind of like the lowest hanging fruit of machine learning applied to this problem. So the models have tons of room to become more and more sophisticated, and hopefully along the way much more advanced and efficient, both in terms of the training, so the teaching of Merlin, which we do at Cornell, as well as the actual test time usage on people's phones. as a machine learning researcher, I'm particularly interested in the human aspect. So with humans and machines kind of working together. So I can envision fun other interfaces to Sound ID where it's not necessarily just telling you the answer, but it's maybe more like quizzing you, like, hey, I heard a bird species, which of these 4 do you think it was? And so it's not, Sound ID isn't just a crutch that you use, it's more of a teaching aid to learn more about the species in your neighborhood. But yeah, I mean, and then of course going back to photo ID, and now that we have sound and photos, we have a good grip on those. Now video is the next obvious thing, and maybe video on your phone isn't the best application, but moving Merlin into other hardware implementations and to enable you to watch your feeder or watch your backyard, and again, it's just like Jesse was mentioning at the beginning, it's just getting more people excited about their birds, so that when news does come across of steep declines, they have reason to want to do action to reverse those declines.
Perfect. I'm going to take a hard pivot. I want to take us thousands of feet underwater. Previously, months ago, we did a couple keynotes where I had Annie Lewandowski from the music department and Katie Payne, who's done a lot of humpback research on humpback whales, their songs. And a lot of the files that we were working with are in the Macaulay library. And it got me thinking, it certainly got viewer Ryan thinking about, do you see this model technology or technology working for conservation of animals other than birds? I know that there have been right whale tracking in the North Atlantic by the lab. Tell us about some of that other work that's done there that's super important.
Absolutely. Our colleagues in the K. Lisa Yang Center for Conservation by Acoustics are very focused on marine environments and trying to figure out how can you monitor whales and how underwater noise is affecting whale communications. They also have projects with fish and gibbons and orangutans and a whole suite of other taxonomic groups. So yeah, this type of technology to be able to detect and classify animals in real time or on recorded devices that you can then analyze that data quickly afterwards, we're really working towards the same goals on the tech front and then applying it to different use cases. So in the case of Merlin, people are getting help identifying birds, but there's a lot of researchers out there who are trying to gather data on species, and perhaps it's elephants out in the Congo in Africa, and then they've got to be able to process that information quickly. And so lots of use cases, same technology that really can power most of it.
Exactly. And Merlin, the bird ID, benefits from the fact that we can just kind of kick back on our deck and go to work, right? We don't have access to humpback whale pods or anything like that. You know what I mean? We don't have underwater recording tech and apps while underwater. Joy Rendall asks, when there are several songs and calls listed for a bird, do we know what these calls and songs are saying? This is a fundamental question, but we know that certain calls are identified with certain behaviors, distress, protecting the nest, mating, and otherwise. Just tell us how that kind of works within the app.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are specific things that birds are trying to say, depending on what the song or call type is. There's alarm calls when birds see a predator. There's the kind of chips when they're just in a foraging flock together and they're just vocalizing. And then there's obviously the songs, which are very breeding behavior related. And so that we tried to do our best to represent all of that in Merlin. A lot of it's kind of hard to know exactly what the behavior each call type maybe applies to. So we kind of kept it general in the descriptions, so that we didn't have to write a full paragraph for each one. But if people are interested in that kind of information, our Birds of the World resource, an online resource, has kind of in-depth information about each of these call types, each of these song types, and it's really interesting to dive in deep on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. I'm glad I asked that one. I love this question. This is a question from viewer Susan Thompson, who asked, will there come a time when you suggest people in a certain area do things to assist birds in their survival? You already do this, but what resources does the lab make available for people to help with bird conservation in their area? There's ways that you can kind of prepare your environment, your house, and so on Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like one example is gardening for birds, and there's
Yeah.
a Bird Academy course that features, the ins and outs of how to get set up in a yard that's more productive for birds and other species. We've also, thinking on a broader scale, there's a project called Lights Out Texas that is encouraging building managers in big cities like Dallas and Houston to shut their lights off in major migration days. So this is kind of a different scale, but those points when we can turn lights off in cities, it's going to minimize the number of birds that are attracted to those lights during migration, and then it's going to mean that fewer birds are hitting buildings as they're migrating at night. So that's a major source of mortality, bird collisions with buildings. So you can also be thinking about windows and where they're placed in properties that you're part of, and putting protection around those windows so there's fewer collisions. There's a couple of other things. I'm sure Drew's got another long list.
You got any tips, Drew?
I'm trying to think. You mostly listed off the things I was
Keeping
thinking of.
cats indoors is another, major predator for the birds that we all love. So something else to think about there. Yep.
Right, cats killing billions of birds every year.
Yeah,
Something like that?
It's
It's a big number. I forget what the exact.
yeah, they're very effective predators. So
Oh my gosh. Let's see, what else do I have here from the audience? Question from Henry. The birdsong works easily, but how do I get close enough to get a picture that can be identified? So let's talk about the photographic opportunities here. We're obviously dealing with spectrograms, but how about, I don't know, what is the future of AI, machine learning as it relates to photography around birds? I don't know. Can anyone take that one, or have I turned a corner?
Yeah, sure. So definitely a challenge to take a good quality photograph of a bird with your smartphone. One cool hack that we've seen from the community is if you're fortunate enough to have a larger camera with you, an SLR, or even just a point and shoot with a nice, with some zoom factor, what we find is people take a picture with that camera and then use their phone to photograph the back of the camera where the image preview shows up, and then just run photo ID on that photo. So if you're actually out in the field specifically to photograph wildlife, we found that to be a really nice way of using photo ID, even though the phone itself isn't taking kind of the distant photo. But yeah, no. So I mean, I think I think the photo ID is due for sort of its 2.0 revamp, and yeah, I think over the next probably over the next year we'll be chipping away at that and getting that out to users, whether it's taking a photo of where there's multiple species and us just kind of putting boxes, detecting each one of those and telling you what each one is, as opposed to you having to zoom in and crop out one individual. Yeah, there's lots of, I think there's lots of cool opportunities for photo ID to be expanded and improved upon.
Good, I'm glad I asked. Little plug for a Fast Company article that was done on you called How a Cornell Scientist Created Shazam for Birds. We're going to share this URL. It gives you some insight into Grant's workflow, how we got through pandemic era programming and engineering. Nice little snippet to check out. Great artist rendition of you, by the way. Now that we've gotten a good look at you, it'll be fun to look at the artist's graphic illustration. Audience, I want to thank you for joining us today. Jesse Barry, Drew Weber, Grant Van Horn, it's been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank all of our viewers for joining today. Real quick, I want you to stick around. You can go to that same, we're going to run a survey. For those of you who are using the QR code and submitting questions, I just want to know how we did, give us a rating, let us know what we did right, how we can improve, and all of that. Your feedback is what keeps us going. So I want to thank our audience for joining us today. I want to thank Kathy Borgman for putting this whole thing together, at least kicking us off, and obviously for that beautiful demo video, and to all the support staff here. So everyone, I want to thank you so much. Stay strong, stay safe. We'll see you next time. Thank you, guests, for joining us today.
thanks, Chris.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.